Good morning.
Good morning.
On Monday, December 10th, 2018, Katie Belowski and Scott Duchesne received the worst news anyone can get. Their son had died. Nick Immesberger, age 24, who had played football locally at Berean Christian School in West Palm Beach and Bridgewater College in Virginia, had flipped his car while on his way home after completing the lunch shift while working as a bartender at the Woods restaurant in Jupiter, Florida. Sadly, he did not survive the crash. Nick had been a bartender at the Woods, which is Tiger Woods' flagship restaurant. Mr. Woods' girlfriend, Erica Herman, is the operations manager at the Woods. Our investigation has sadly revealed that video footage from inside the restaurant itself from that day showing Nick Immesberger drinking for 3 hours has been destroyed by the Woods. We have filed a lawsuit now to prevent the further destruction of evidence. Tiger, Erica, and the Woods staff all knew that Nick had a disease and was addicted to alcohol. Despite this knowledge, they served him drinks for 3 hours, fueling his addiction. They didn't call him a cab. They didn't offer to get him a ride home. They just let him leave. When he died, Nick had over 3 times the legal limit of alcohol from the Woods in his system. Yesterday, we began the process of holding responsible those who broke the law by filing a lawsuit against Mr. Woods, his girlfriend, Ms. Herman, and the Woods restaurant. Yes, we believe in personal responsibility. We do. But the law in Florida is really clear. When a person or business owner overserves and makes a profit off of a person known to be addicted to alcohol, that person or business is responsible for the tragedies that are certain to occur. Our hope with this lawsuit is that the management and staff at the Woods and other restaurants across the United States take their responsibility seriously. We want to avoid tragedies like this in the future so that other parents don't lose their kids. I'd like to introduce to you my litigation director and trial attorney, who's seated next to me. His name is Spencer Kuvin, who will be handling the litigation in this matter. He has more specific details about what I've talked about what the restaurant knew, about the law in Florida, and about the Woods' unfortunate destruction of evidence in this case.
Thank you all again for being here, and I know that Nick's parents appreciate the time that you've spent to understand the full story of what occurred here. This is an absolute tragedy. This is a tragedy because someone who had a problem was not taken care of, and instead the Woods, Tiger, and Erica chose to fuel that addiction. They fueled his addiction with more alcohol instead of help. It's time as a society that we start working to fix the problems of addiction and not fueling that problem to further cause tragedies in other families like the one that's occurred here. We know, because of our investigation, that not only was this young man an employee of the bar, but he was personally known to both Tiger and Erica. Erica specifically asked him to come back to work at the bar, and she was aware of his addiction and problem. We know that because just 1 month before this crash occurred, Nick had been overserved again at this same bar by the employees, and he had crashed another vehicle. And despite letting everyone there at the bar know what had occurred, they kept doing it. They kept serving a young man who had a problem. This is a family that worked hard to address those problems. Even though Nick was an adult, they worked with him. His father took him to programs to try to get him better. And this was a family that was trying to repair the problem but yet it was an employer that just chose to ignore it. At the end of the day, Tiger had a flagship restaurant, and you would think that somebody who has a problem would want his own flagship restaurant to act better. This restaurant should have set an example for people with addictions, not fueled it, not caused further destruction, further death. Just like he ignored his own problem for years, he and his girlfriend chose to ignore this problem that their own employee had. And as a result, this tragedy ensued. We'd like to let his parents say a few words, because I know that they would like to talk about their son, obviously, and what he's meant to them.
Can we slide the microphones over so
Yes.
we can hear them? Or thank you.
Thanks. I just wanted everyone to know that Nicholas was a wonderful son, and he wasn't finished here. He had plans. He wanted to be a firefighter. He was all set up and ready. He was going to EMT school in January, and he just he was a huge part of our family. And he's left behind, four siblings, and I don't know. He just wasn't finished here yet. He had plans to do stuff and help people because that's who he was. And it's just devastating that he's not here. I'm sorry.
Nick was a good kid, a funny kid. He had a lot of drive, and he was taken away from us. And I just feel that he should still be here with us. And I'm just very disappointed in this whole situation.
So we're happy to take questions at this point from anyone who has any particular questions, either about the lawsuit, the law, Nick.
Can I start? I'll start with two questions actually.
Yeah.
One, when was the video destroyed? Was it in the normal course of business in terms of they hold on to the video? Or was it destroyed in response specifically to your lawsuit?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So one of the most significant issues we have here is the destruction of evidence. Obviously, it shows that somebody knew something had gone wrong and they wanted to get rid of that evidence. We have evidence to show that that videotape showing Nick at the bar that night after he got off at 3 p.m., drinking for 3 hours at the bar, was destroyed shortly after the crash had occurred. So we have, through our investigation, uncovered evidence to show that the bar knew what happened. They knew about the crash that night, and shortly thereafter that video evidence was then destroyed and deleted off of the servers that they had there at the Woods.
So you believe it was destroyed because of his death or not in the normal course of business?
We absolutely believe that the videotape was destroyed as a direct result of his death and knowledge that he was there that night, and they wanted to get rid of that evidence.
And then also, secondly, I mean, you acknowledge that Nick had a drinking problem.
Yes. Yes.
Do you think that he should have, I mean, he's crashed his car before, do you think that he should have been driving, even been driving at all?
Absolutely. It's a good question. The issue of addiction is paramount in this case. Florida law is very clear that if a bar, an establishment, or any person serves alcohol to someone who is habitually addicted, then that person becomes responsible for serving that person who has the disease of alcoholism. There is a personal responsibility in every one of us, regardless of what occurs. But at a point where you have someone that has a disease, someone who is alcoholic, then you as a bar owner, as an establishment that's making a profit off of selling alcohol, have a responsibility. And that responsibility is not to overserve someone and continue to serve someone who has that disease.
And why did he choose to continue to be a bartender?
Nick made a living doing this job. And at some bars, ones that are more responsible, they don't allow the employees to drink. They don't allow employees to drink while they're on the job, and good establishments don't allow employees to sit there and drink after they've finished working, especially if they've got a problem. But at the end of the day, Nick was making a living doing what he loved, and unfortunately, given his disease, instead of helping him, they made it worse and caused a tragedy.
So why not name the bartender or whoever it was that was serving him in your lawsuit?
So the bartender is an individual, and under Florida law, that bar itself is responsible, and anyone who has responsibility from a management and ownership level ultimately is responsible for what occurs. The bartender is an employee, and therefore the bar is held responsible for the acts of that bartender. So yes, that bartender is culpable, but because the bartender works for the bar, because Erica manages the bar, and because Tiger owns that bar, they are all liable under Florida law.
Through your investigation, do you have any evidence to prove that Nick was paying for these drinks after his shift, or were these bartenders just giving them to him?
So there are certain facts that we're not going to disclose at this time because obviously we haven't started taking the depositions of employees. But what I can tell you is that we know that Nick sat at the bar after he was off. In other words, after he had clocked out and was drinking for up to 3 hours there at the bar before he left and crashed his vehicle.
After he crashed the first time, I think about a month prior to this incident, was his license revoked or taken away? Was he allowed to continue to drive?
Sadly, the crash that occurred 1 month before was an opportunity missed. He was able to make it home that night. There was no police report. There were no police evidence of that particular crash. But what he did do is tell the employees at the bar what had happened. And instead of trying to help him, knowing that clearly he had a problem, knowing that he had just left their own establishment drunk and had crashed his car, they didn't help.
Do you know if Tiger and Erica were there that night? And my question is, you mentioned why the bar owner is culpable. Why has Erica been named in this case?
It's a good question. We have evidence to prove that only nights before this fatal crash, both Erica and Tiger were sitting at the bar with Nick while he was drinking. And that night, just nights before, Nick had to be picked up by his own sister from the bar because he could barely walk. And while he was stumbling out of that bar behind Erica and Tiger himself, he knocked over an entire tray of glasses in the kitchen as they walked him out back. So yes, both Erica and Tiger are responsible because they had knowledge. Tiger owned that bar. It was his flagship restaurant, and Erica is the manager of that flagship restaurant. She's the one that sets the tone, the culture for everything that goes on there.
Was she the manager on duty that night?
She was the general manager, so she's the manager no matter what night it may be. She was the general manager for the entire bar, and then what she did was she hired young kids to then manage when she was not around. And unfortunately, she set the tone for the culture in that bar. That culture was drinking and drinking to excess.
So just to clarify, they weren't necessarily physically there that night.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. But under Florida law, it doesn't matter. Under Florida law, you as the owner of the bar, you are the one that's responsible for what occurs on your property. You're the one making the profit off of selling alcohol. You're the one who employed the young man who ended up drinking at your establishment. And Erica is the one that sets that tone and culture as the general manager for the establishment. And like I said, just nights before, they had knowledge of what was going on.
I think you said that Nick was trying to repair the problem. As this was going on, was he actively seeking treatment to help his addiction?
We know that Scott had taken him to a program to get help. He had gone at least once. And the members of the bar, a few of the bartenders as well, knew that he was trying to get better, that he was trying to help himself and stop the disease that he had. In addition to that, we know that on no less than 4 to 5 occasions, he had gotten so drunk at that bar because they overserved him, his sister had to pick him up. His father got a call one night last year from a bartender that was there asking his own father to come pick him up at the bar. They're the ones that overserved him. We can't forget that. They're the ones that put the alcohol out for him to drink knowing he had an addiction problem. And they're the ones that are responsible under the law.
Did anyone in Nick's family talk to the manager or the owner of the bar, restaurant, and say, our son has a problem, don't serve him?
Again, we know that at least on one occasion prior, that the bar called Scott, his father, and asked him to come pick him up because they had overserved him and he couldn't drive home. We also know that on a separate occasion, his own girlfriend actually called the bar, and now his girlfriend actually worked there as well and told the people at the bar, stop serving him. He has a problem. You guys need to stop giving him alcohol.
And did any family members say stop?
Well, again, Scott went there to the bar to go pick him up. You know, unfortunately, when someone has an addiction problem, there's only so much you can do to help point them in the right direction, and that's what they were trying to do.
Was there ever a conversation that having to pick him up on prior occasions that this may not be the best job for you with having that addiction, that maybe we should seek other options?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And at the end of the day, it wasn't. It clearly wasn't the best job for this young man. But the responsibility is on the employer and the bar to see that. They're the ones that own the establishment. They're the ones that buy the bottles of liquor that they're serving to this young man. They're the ones that allow that drinking to occur on their property. So ultimately, they're the ones with the culpability and responsibility to step back and say, you know what? This is a young man with a problem. And you know what? The owner of this bar wants to set an example for people that have problems. So we're not going to continue to overserve someone who has that problem.
What is being sought in damages?
At the end of the day, we're going to let a jury determine what is fair and reasonable for the life of this young man and for what these two parents have lost.
Is there anything you can say about that day? He was there obviously for 3 hours.
Right.
You know, is he asking, give me drinks? Are they just throwing them at him, saying, here, have more? Can you say anything about kind of the atmosphere?
So we know that the bar had a culture of drinking. There were young managers that were hired by Erica herself that were replacing older, more established management teams that were there in place. We know that the bartenders at the time were serving a young man that they knew had a clear problem. We know that he was there for at least 3 hours after his shift drinking. As far as the facts of payment and how those drinks were served to him, again, there are certain facts that I want to be able to hold back for now because the litigation is still underway.
And was he by himself, or were there other servers off shift who were all with him?
We believe at this time that he was by himself while he was sitting there and the bartenders were serving him. Yeah.
At the other points in time when family members or his girlfriend had come to pick him up, was that at his request? Was that at the request of other people at the bar, and the previous incidents where he had to be picked up by someone else?
There were numerous incidents on occasion where family members had to come pick him up. His sister had to come pick him up on 4 or 5 occasions. His father had to come pick him up once, his girlfriend on another occasion, and it was mixed. So at times the bar would call and ask someone to come get him, and at times he would call and ask someone to come pick him up.
Do we know that there was no one at the bar at some point that told him you need to get a different ride home? Because that had happened previously.
We know that the night in question that unfortunately there were a few members of the staff, and I'm not at liberty to disclose right now, that were well aware that he was over intoxicated that night and didn't take action when they should have. At the end of the day, though, the key here is if we had had the surveillance, if it hadn't been destroyed, we'd know exactly who was there, what they were doing, and how this all played out. But sadly, as soon as they realized what had happened, they started deleting.
Nobody ever told them you have to have a different job. You cannot be behind a bar because you have this disease.
Ultimately, everyone bears a certain amount of responsibility, both for themselves and others. But at the end of the day, this is a business. This is a business that sells alcohol. And as a business owner and a manager of a business, you're responsible to make sure that your business is run according to the law. And if you overserve someone that's habitually addicted, then you bear the responsibility. So obviously, we can all sit here and say, unfortunately, this was a young man with a disease, and he probably should have gotten a different job or gone somewhere else. But ultimately, he was off shift and he wasn't working at the time that all this happened. If they had just had him go home, then it would have been all over, and he would have made it home safely, and these parents would still have their son.
On that note, just first of all, our deepest sympathies. You guys have been through some of the most painful months, probably. What is it that you want to see happen? What is it that you guys want to have accomplished after all of this?
I'm hoping that the restaurants and the bars take notice and realize when someone is impaired and they can't drive, so it doesn't happen to somebody else. Because I know this isn't the only bar that overserves, and it's a tragedy. Or just a simple phone call to us to go pick them up. Could have, we were always right there. It could have, but they just served him until he basically couldn't walk, and I feel that they failed me. He referred to the Woods as his family and as his friends, and when he needed them, they kind of just looked the other way.
Any follow-up questions?
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Thank
Thank
you
you all
very
so
much
much
for
for
your
your time. You're gonna need it.
Sorry, is there a timeline of, as this moves forward, anything coming up next?
Once the complaint's been filed, we've been in contact with the lawyers for the Woods, and we're seeing now whether or not they'll agree to accept service. We're going to get the complaint served, and I assume that both Erica and Tiger already know about this complaint being served, at least filed in the court, and we'll work on service of the complaint, and then they'll have to respond accordingly. So I fully expect that you all will be seeing hearings coming up very soon in this case. And by the way, one of the issues that we're going to be addressing with the court immediately is going to be that destruction of evidence. And we're going to be asking the court to take possession of the computer terminal that's utilized for surveillance at that facility so that we can have it examined by a forensic computer analyst. Okay? Thank you.
everyone.
Mr. Goldfarb, by any chance, any in Spanish, could we have, would it be possible or not?
What in Spanish?
Like a short interview of this in Spanish. Would it be possible? If not, no worries.
None of us speak Spanish. If you taught me Spanish, I'd be happy to oblige.
Yeah, I just got tired of moving. No one else.